The wind whistles through a broken doorway as a man's shot goes wide. He stands barely breathing, handcuffed to a leather-scorched bracelet. Across the dusty porch, a pale girl holds the barrel of a rusted revolver. Ellis Granger's boots crunched over sun-baked dirt and brittle sagebrush as the late afternoon sky burned copper. He paused on the threshold of the ramshackle porch, the wood groaning underfoot like an old horse settling. His breath caught at the sight of splintered planks and a sagging roof remnants of a home once lived in, now surrendered to wind and time. He reached into his saddlebag, feeling the soft fold of the deed, stamped and signed by some faceless clerk in Washington. $1 bought him this sliver of earth, a chance to plant roots where none dared before. After 10 years of iron rails and broken promises, he needed more than work. He needed peace. Inside, the air was cool, scented with pine needles and the faintest trace of cooking smoke. Ellis flicked his hand toward a fireplace piled with dry twigs and nodded. His carpenter's eye noted the fresh line of mortar along the chimney's base, the new boards tacked beneath a window. Someone had claimed this place before him. Someone who cared enough to repair what ruin whispered was beyond saving. He slid his pack from his mule's back and settled it by the back door, untying the rope that held his single companion. The mule flicked an ear, sensing water, and beyond it a promise of oats. Ellis stepped deeper into the cabin. Light filtered through gauzy curtains, dust motes drifting like ghosts in a sunbeam. Each footstep stirred them. Each breath awakened a memory he could not name. He ran a hand along a tabletop, carved with initials and half-erased dates, evidence of a life measured by passing seasons. His pulse quickened. Every nail and notch spoke of someone's claim, someone's loss. Here was the heart of the land's story, written in sweat and splintered wood. He climbed the narrow stairs, each one offset by careful repair, until his ears tuned to a steady rhythm above, breath, slow and deliberate, not fear, but something deeper, determination, perhaps, or habit born of solitude. He hesitated at the doorway, tightening his grip on his hat, and peered inside. The loft was sparse. A cot frame with a rough blanket, a small trunk bound in leather, a broken mirror leaning against the far wall. No footprints marred the straw-strewn floor. No copper kettle sat on a shelf. Yet the breath continued, the proof of a living soul. Ellis lowered himself into a chair beside a dusty window, and, with the hush of boots on wood, called out, "Anyone here?" His voice was neither challenge nor plea, but a question carried on respect. Silence answered, save for the shifting of straw at his feet and the mule's soft wicker below. He rose, stepping into the beam of late light, and whispered into the quiet, "This land's claimed. It's mine now." The pause that followed felt like an invitation. Ellis closed his eyes against the glare, tasting the cool hush of possibility. Somewhere beyond the door, the world breathed with him waiting to exhale. Dawn's first light seeped through the cracked window pane, painting the cabin floor in slats of pale gold. Ellis Granger stirred on the hard-packed mattress, his back stiff from sleeping beneath the rafters. He rubbed grit from his eyes and listened. The cabin was still, as though holding its breath. He slid from the bed, leather boots whisper quiet against the boards, and moved toward the door, hand resting on the grip of his Colt. Outside, his mule stood tethered to a post, tail swishing at flies already busy with the dawn. A soft sound drifted from the corner where the hearth still held embers. It was a breath, measured and steady, unlike the ragged wheeze of a man at the end of his rope. Ellis eased forward and found her there, a girl no older than 19, crouched behind a stack of firewood. Her eyes, wide and unflinching, reflected both fear and a steel-edged resolve. The lantern light revealed bones too sharp, cheeks too hollow. She was haunted by years spent alone, yet dangerous in her silence. He lowered his hand from his belt. "Morning," he said, voice even. He offered a slow nod, wary but unthreatening. She didn't blink. Her rifle lay across her knees, barrel pointed at the rafters. Ellis noted the careful way her finger hovered beside the trigger, steady, deliberate, not panicked. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said. "Name's Ellis Granger. I claim this place." His hand brushed the deed peeking from his shirt pocket. She watched him, weighing words as if they were bullets. Ellis eased back a step and set his pack on the table, unzipping it to reveal a loaf of hardtack and a tin cup. "Coffee?" he offered, though he knew the gesture might be met with distrust. She lifted the rifle an inch, enough to remind him that hospitality here was earned. Then she shifted, resting the barrel on the floorboards. "Don't like strangers," she said, voice low, flat. "Least of all armed ones." Her words were a statement of fact, not a question. Ellis unshouldered the bedroll and laid it near the hearth. "I brought tools too," he said. "Hammers, nails, a new handle for that broken window latch." He gestured toward the sash where wind whistled through a splintered frame. "I figure we can help each other fix this place up." Her eyes narrowed, but she did not lower the rifle. Ellis poured water into a small kettle he pulled from his pack, placing it on the hearth embers. Steam curled upward as the metal hissed. He filled 2 tin cups and set one before her, then drank from his, feeling warmth ripple through his chest. She didn't touch hers. "Why are you here?" she finally asked, voice brittle. Ellis met her gaze. "Same as you, I guess. Looking for a chance. Dirt cheap, too," he added, managing a half-smile. She watched his lips curve, as though deciding if kindness was a trick or a truth. She lowered the rifle just a fraction. "I'm Lydia Holt," she said. Her grip on the cup tightened, knuckles whitening beneath ash-stained skin. "This was my home long before some clerk signed your name to a paper." Ellis inclined his head, respect in his eyes. "Then you're the one I need to meet." Silence stretched, not awkward now but charged with uncertainty, with fragile possibility. Outside, the wind carried a distant promise of storms. Inside, 2 claimants sat over coffee and choice words, the land waiting to decide which story would hold true. The first light of morning found Ellis at the barn, the heavy door swinging open on rusted hinges. He paused to breathe in the cool air, tasting chipped plaster and damp earth. Inside, the loft's rafters smelled of old hay and loneliness. He set to work prying loose a cracked floorboard, thinking of how every plank here had borne witness to Lydia Holt's quiet rebellion against the world. Tried above, a faint shuffle heralded her approach. She leaned against a post, arms crossed, rifle slung low, watching his every move. Ellis offered a nod but kept his eyes on the broken board. When he lifted it, he found matted soil and, beneath that, a shallow imprint, grave too small for an adult's body. He looked up at her. "You buried him here." His voice was gentle, almost reverent. Lydia's jaw tightened, and she stepped forward to take the edge of the board from his hands. She removed it carefully, revealing the faded hilt of a knife and the rusted rim of a leather pouch. Dirt clung to both, as if the earth itself sought to guard her secret. "My father," she said, voice low. She knelt and brushed soil from the knife's pommel. "He fought that taxman who came to take this land, lost more than his money." She closed her eyes and inhaled, drawing strength from the damp air. They nailed the eviction notice to the front gate at dawn. By sundown, he was gone. Ellis sank beside her on the packed earth, the wood of the barn floor cold beneath his knees. He traced the knife's worn handle with a fingertip. "You stayed because—" His question hung between them, stirring the dust motes in a lone ray of sunlight. She met his gaze, shoulders squared. "Because this was all he had left. I wouldn't let them take him too." Her knuckles whitened around the knife. "I buried him under the elder tree beyond the fence, wrapped in his favorite coat. I haven't left since." Ellis nodded, understanding settling like evening shadows. He rose and offered his hand. Lydia hesitated, then took it, letting him help her to her feet. He retrieved a hammer and a coil of fresh fencing wire from his pack. "Let's mend the fence, then find your father's tree." She sniffed, tucking the knife into her belt, and followed him outside. Together they walked the boundary, Ellis sliding posts into sun-baked holes, while Lydia stretched wire between them. Her movements were precise, trained by years of necessity. He admired her steadiness and endurance, qualities forged of grief and survival. The fence grew straight and strong beneath their combined effort, a barrier not just against livestock but against the memories that prowled these fields at night. By midday, they stood beneath the elder tree, its silvery leaves whispering above a low mound of earth. Lydia knelt once more, pressing her palm against the soil. Ellis placed a hand on her shoulder, offering solidarity without words. In that silent communion, past and present converged, her father's legacy entwined with the promise of what they might build together. Above them, the barn's aged beams creaked as if in approval. Down below, the fence glinted in the sun, a testament to new alliances forged in the dust of old wounds. Ellis returned to the cabin with 2 bundles of freshly sawn planks slung over his shoulder. The midday sun pressed down, heat rippling off tin roofs and curling dust motes around him like restless spirits. Lydia watched from the doorway, rifle propped against her hip, eyes narrowed against the glare. Ellis set the boards against the wall beneath the broken window, gently tapping each edge with a hammer so the fit would be snug. The boards gleamed pale against the weathered beams, a promise of shelter from wind and rain. He caught her gaze and offered a slow nod, as if to say these gifts were meant as peace, not intrusion. Lydia's posture was taut, arms folded, but the rifle never left its iron hook. Ellis worked in measured strokes, sweat darkening the brim of his hat, and spoke without looking up. "These'll keep the draft out. I can cut and fit tomorrow." His voice was neither boast nor apology, but an offer grounded in honest labor. She remained silent, but when the sun dipped low, Ellis retrieved a coil of barbed wire and a spool of sturdy twine. He began replacing the sagging fence alongside the barn, winding the wire around each post with methodical care. Lydia stepped forward, laying her rifle aside before kneeling to help. Her fingers, lean and precise, looped the wire where his reach faltered. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly as they worked side by side. When the last fence post stood straight, Ellis set down his tools and turned to her. "Share the land," he said, voice quiet. "Share the work. 2 pairs of hands faster than one." He paused, measuring her reaction. Lydia's eyes reflected the waning day, hard as river stones, but curious in the depths. She shook her head once softly and reached into her shirt to retrieve a scrap of paper yellowed at the edges. "Nothing's free," she said, voice brittle. "Last man who offered partnership left me with a grave." Ellis accepted the paper without flinching. It was the eviction notice, a crude summons to leave framed in cold type. He stood and held it aloft, letting the breeze fold it against his palm. "I didn't come to take," he said. "I came to build. If you want me gone, just say so." His gaze met hers, steady as the horizon line. Lydia regarded him in silence, then crumpled the notice and dropped it at their feet. Night crept across the sky, and Ellis built a small fire beyond the porch. He unpacked a kettle and poured coffee into 2 tin cups, steam curling like ghosts of unspoken trust. He handed one to Lydia, who took it without drinking, eyes fixed on the glowing embers. He sipped his own, the bitterness grounding him. The land around them settled into lull before the storm, as if listening for the next move. Lydia finally exhaled, shoulders slumping. She raised the cup in a half-toast, lips parting to speak. The words hung on the firelight, suspended between caution and hope. Ellis held his breath, prepared to walk away if he had Tobit ready to build something new from these fragile offerings. Night draped the ranch in velvet black, the moon a slender sliver above the ridge. Ellis sat on the porch steps, elbows on knees, staring into a circle of firelight where sparks curled toward silence. The wind rustled through the broken eaves, carrying sage and distant coyotes' cries. His mind replayed Lydia's warning, "Strangers come looking for the Holt girl." He'd thought that meant one more wary glance at the horizon. He was wrong. A soft thud in the corral snapped his head up. 2 horses stood tethered beyond the fence, muzzles sniffing the air. Their riders dismounted without a creak of leather, moving like shadows lengthening under starlight. Ellis slipped off the porch, boots sinking into cold dust, and crouched behind a broken barrel. He peered through a gap in the rails. The first rider knelt beside the trough, hands trailing along the lip. The other circled the barn, eyes glinting in moonlight. Ellis's pulse hammered. They wore dusters and wide-brimmed hats, voices hushed but with an edge that cut through the quiet. He caught fragments. Golds buried under her floorboards. Maps, stolen ledger. His jaw clenched. These men believed Lydia held treasure, not the memory of her father's sweat and bone. He could see the first rider heft a lantern, its yellow glow painting his oilskin coat. Ellis risked a step forward, weight shifting. A board creaked beneath his heel. Both riders froze. The man at the trough lifted his head, rifle slung across his back, lips parting in a silent curse. Ellis ducked back, heart in his throat. He needed to lure them away from Lydia, draw their search into the scrub brush where his colt might even the odds. He scrambled to the corral gate and unlatched it with a quiet click. The gate swung inward, horses stepping out. Ellis whistled low, a signal stolen from his railroad days, and stamped a hoof. The beasts neighed, pawed at the ground, and bolted toward the brush. Moonlight gleamed on the riders as they cursed and gave chase, lantern bobbing like a wounded firefly. Ellis dashed across the corral, vaulting the fence with the ease of a man who'd spent 10 years vaulting ties and spikes. His breath came ragged but steady. He'd learned to control it when blasting ties and facing steam whistles. He followed the horse's tracks into the sand, each hoofprint a glaring target in the lantern glow. Behind him, Lydia stirred on the porch, rifle in hand, uncertain whether to follow or stay with the cabin. Ellis's figure receded into the night, silhouette lit by a single lantern bobbing closer. He didn't look back. The land had taught him that the only promise in darkness was action. He ducked into a tangle of sage and waited, colt raised, nerves coiled. Above, the moon traced its path, witness to the reckoning unfolding beneath its pale light. In that hush before the gunfire, Ellis felt the earth hold its breath, waiting to record which story would be written in blood. Gray light crept over the horizon as Ellis backed out of the sagebrush, colt still warm from the night's chase. He paused on the crest of a low rise, lantern slung at his side, and watched the riders glare into the scrub. Their boots crushed brittle stalks as they searched for stragglers. Ellis took a slow breath, letting the dawn's cool air settle his racing heart. This was no longer about stolen gold or ledger pages. It was about Lydia's home, and what he'd sworn to protect. He dropped the lantern behind a tangle of mesquite, then slipped down the slope. The first rider emerged into soft morning light, lantern held high despite the rising sun. Ellis crouched behind a rock, careful not to disturb the loose gravel. When the man swung the lantern past him, Ellis rose with precise calm, colt leveled. "Stop," he said, as low and hard as a thunderclap. The rider froze, eyes wide beneath his dusty brim. The second man came into Viola shadow at Ellis's shoulder until the barrel of his rifle caught the light. Both held their fire for a heartbeat, measuring the carpenter-turned-guard who now stood between them and Lydia's claim. Ellis's voice did not waver. "You've no business here." He let the glimmer of dawn catch the hammer of his revolver. "Turn around and ride back, or I'll put you down like wolves." The first rider's jaw worked. He was younger than Ellis had expected, face creased by both sun and suspicion. "Gold," he said, voice trembling. "Your girl's got it hidden under the floorboards." He spat into the dust. "We want our share." Ellis's gaze cut through the lie. "She's hiding her father's grave, not your fortune. Now leave." He tightened his grip. The second rider's rifle wavered, uncertain. A single shot rang out sharp, echoing off distant hills. Ellis's knee buckled as the bullet bit into his thigh. He stumbled but remained upright, colt trained on both men. Pain bloomed hot and furious, but adrenaline lent him steadiness. He fired twice before either man could react. Both riders crumpled, faces slack, as dawn's light revealed the bitter truth of greed. Ellis dropped the revolver and stumbled forward, ripping his shirt to staunch the bleeding. He dragged himself to the nearest rider, restless as himself until this moment. He found no map, no key to hidden treasure, only clenched fists and empty pockets. The second man lay farther off, rifle still warm where it fell. With effort, Ellis pushed himself erect and limped back along their tracks. He climbed the rise to the barn's edge where Lydia stood rifle in hand, breath caught, eyes wide. The sight of his bloodied shirt made her knees buckle. He lifted a hand in greeting, forcing a crooked smile. "They won't be riding back," he managed, voice thick with pain. She rushed to steady him, eyes blazing with fear and relief. "Ellis, why?" she whispered. He pressed a finger to his lips, wincing as cold dawn air touched his wound. "Because this is your home," he said. "Because you stayed when everyone else walked away." Lydia knelt beside him, hand trembling as she unwrapped a cloth from her belt. "And I'll stay," she replied, voice steady now, "if you'll let me help." As the sun rose fully, washing the land in pale gold, they tended Ellis's wound together. In that quiet reckoning they found something stronger than fear, a bond forged not in promise, but in shared blood and the unyielding will to claim what was rightfully theirs. Late morning sun slanted through the barn's dusty windows, cutting golden beams across floorboards still stained by last night's reckoning. Lydia knelt beside the fallen rider, eyes cold as flint as she searched his coat pockets. Ellis sat on the edge of the stall, bandages wrapped tight around his thigh, watching her without speaking. Every breath between them felt charged, as if the land itself leaned in to witness what they would find. Lydia's hand trembled when she drew out a folded parchment, edges singed, ink blurred but legible. She smoothed it on her knee, the original surveyor's map, stamped in red with county seal and bearing her father's name in crisp cursive. The property lines matched the borders they had rebuilt together, down to a forgotten arroyo at the northern edge. Her heart thundered as she traced the lines with a finger stained by dust and blood. "Dad recorded this," she whispered. "He never forfeited a single acre." Ellis rose and leaned over her shoulder, careful not to rest weight on his injured leg. "Then they lied," he said, voice low. "Your eviction was a sham." He dug into his coat and produced the ledger he'd pried from the second rider's grip, leather bound, pages yellowed with age. Lydia took it, hand steady now, and opened to the first entry. Her father's neat script, listing every transaction, every debt paid, every graft of fence posts set. The ledger ended abruptly with a smudge of fresh ink and a ragged tear. Lydia's breath caught. She flipped through pages until she reached an empty stave at the backup placeholder for a final payment that would have secured the deed outright. "He died before he could finish," she said, voice wavering. "They destroyed this to steal my home." She closed the book, knees pressing into straw. Ellis placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "We'll set it right," he promised. "County seat records, a judge who still values truth. I'll ride and fight this with every nail in my pack." His voice caught on fight, but Lydia didn't flinch. Instead, she nodded, eyes bright with a fierce light. She stood and tucked both map and ledger into her belt pouch. "First," she said, voice firm, "we bury this war in the ground where it belongs." She led Ellis outside, toward the shallow grave they'd opened beneath the elder tree. The land hummed beneath their boots, as if welcoming the return of its story. Lydia dug with a freshly sharpened spade, turning soil dark and rich. Ellis gathered splintered wood from the barn rafters, fashioning a simple crate around the map and ledger. When the hole lay ready, they slid the crate into the earth. Lydia pressed her palm to the soil, whispering a prayer to ghosts she never met. Ellis laid a sturdy cross atop the mound, a marker not only for her father's grave, but for the truth they swore to reclaim. As they stood, side by side beneath the elder's quivering leaves, the wind sighed through the branches. The barn behind them bore witness to promises forged in blood and ink. Together they turned toward the house, its boards shining under the midday sun, and stepped forward. The land had given up its secret. Now it was theirs to protect. By the time the sun dipped behind the western ridge, Ellis and Lydia stood at the freshly turned graves that dotted the slope. 3 crude markers hewn from barnwood, bearing names no ledger ever recorded. Blood had soaked into the earth, and the wind carried its faint metallic tang across the tall grass. Ellis pressed his palm against the cool wood of the cross marking the second rider's grave, wrist heavy where the bandage wrapped his thigh had soaked through. Lydia knelt at the first marker, brushing a line of blood from her father's name before placing a sprig of sage in the soil. They worked in silence, each lost to the memory of what had come before. Men who believed the land owed them gold, men who traded innocence for bullets. Ellis felt the weight of his own bullet hole like a brand proof that mercy cost blood. He sank to one knee beside Lydia, handing her a cloth to bind the second rider's marker more firmly. She accepted it without a word, eyes red but unbowed. Together, they wrapped the wood in twine, knotting promises they both knew must be kept. The last body lay near the far fence, face down in the dust at the spot where Ellis had drawn first blood. He shivered as he straightened the marker above it, then stepped back to let Lydia place a handful of earth atop the grave. She whispered a blessing in a language she'd taught herself to remember, words her father spoke when he blessed seed before planting. The wind stilled for a heartbeat, as though the land listened. Ellis offered his hand, and Lydia took it, dusty fingertips curling around his palm. They rose together, shoulders squared against the gathering dusk. Behind them, the barn's silhouette stood sentinel, its walls stained dark by sweat and sorrow. The ranch was theirs to claim now, not just by deed but by blood and redemption. As they walked back toward the house, Lydia paused at the fence gate and turned to Ellis. "We've given their bodies peace," she said softly. "Now, we give this place its future." He nodded, pain and pride coiling in his chest like barbed wire. He touched the bandage on his thigh and met her gaze. "We rebuild," he agreed. Together, night fell as they crossed the corral, lantern in hand. Ellis set the light beside the well, its handle greased and turning true. Lydia laid fresh boards beneath the broken window, each nail driven home by Ellis's steady hand. Behind them, shadows shifted, but neither flinched. The rhythm of hammer on wood beat out a promise stronger than fear. Later, seated on the porch with cups of strong coffee, they let the quiet settle around them. Lydia watched the horizon where trouble had come and gone, now laced with starlight. Ellis wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "Tomorrow," he said, voice rough but certain. "We'll claim what's ours." She leaned into him, tired but resolute. "And no one will take it again." In that moment, the ranch exhaled grave soil and fresh timber bound by shared courage. Blood had stained the land, but redemption was theirs to shape. The faint call of a coyote echoed across the valley, and Ellis and Lydia listened, ready to answer with their own unspoken vow. This land would remember. Sunlight slanted through the porch's broken rafters as Ellis strapped his saddlebag for the ride to Dry Creek County seat. Lydia stood behind him, map and ledger tucked securely beneath her coat. He paused in the threshold, hand raised in a brief salute, and she stepped forward to press a flask of whiskey into his palm. "For courage," she said, voice steady. He nodded, meeting her gaze with quiet resolve. "I'll bring justice back," he promised, then swung into the saddle and guided his horse down the dusty lane. The ride was long, the heat rising off the plain like steam. Ellis felt each mile press against him, reminding him of the bandage on his thigh and the stakes that bound him to Lydia's fate. He kept the flask close, drawing a stiff swallow whenever dust threatened to choke his words. By late afternoon, the courthouse loomed whitewashed stone half hidden beneath climbing vines. He tethered his horse, adjusted the ledger inside his coat, and stepped into the shade of a carved portico. Inside, the clerk's eyes widened at the surveyor's map. "This seal is decades old," the man murmured, fingers trembling as he traced the red ink. Ellis laid the eviction notice beside it, then spread the ledger open. "This proves every payment my partner's father made. We claim the land as of right." The clerk retreated behind a counter stacked with dusty files, returning with a fresh deed and a stamped envelope. "Your co-claimants," he said, placing the papers before Ellis. "Signed and sealed." Relief washed through Ellis until he remembered the miles back and the woman who waited. He left an affidavit for Lydia and tucked the new deed into his saddlebag, mounting as the sun touched the horizon. Twilight found him racing the wind, each stride a prayer. He felt the land's heartbeat in the thrum of his horse's hooves, driving him home. After dark, he rode into the ranch yard, lantern swinging at his side. Lydia met him at the gate, eyes bright beneath moonlight. He dismounted, unbuckled the deed, and handed it to her. Together, they lit the porch lamp, its glow unfurling across fresh boards and repaired beams. She unfolded the paper, reading each line until the land's true border etched in ink and law matched the fence they had built by hand. Lydia looked up, voice thick with emotion. "It's ours," she whispered. Ellis pulled her close, the barn and graves fading behind them as the ranch came alive in the lantern's circle. He brushed a strand of ash-blonde hair behind her ear. "It's home now," he said. They stepped inside together, closing the door against tomorrow's winds. Outside, the prairie stretched silent and vast, waiting for their next chapter. Inside, two hearts beat steady as the land reclaimed by truth, a new claim forged in sweat, blood, and unbreakable trust. Dawn found Ellis and Lydia already at work beneath a streaked sky, the air still cool as they lifted beams into place along the barn's broken eaves. Each board settled with a soft thud, echoing across the yard where new growth of sage sprouted from turned earth. The barn had become more than shelter, it was the testament of their shared resolve. Ellis measured each joist with a carpenter's eye. Lydia held the plank steady, fingers rough but sure. The creak of wood under their weight was redeemed by the promise of stability. As the sun rose, they turned to the fields where winter's dust had hardened into cracked clay. Together they drove fence posts deeper, hammering long nails until the rails sang of protection. Lydia's laughter burst across the plains when Ellis missed his mark, the echo light and unexpected in the morning hush. He tipped his hat in mock apology, and she offered a grin that warmed him through the damp chill. In that moment, the loneliness that had bound them both snapped free, leaving only two allies marked by shared labor. By midday, the ranch took shape under their hands. Fresh boards on the cabin, fences that held spring calves safely, the well's bucket turning true once more. Steam rose from Ellis's cooking pot as he prepared a simple stew, the aroma of wild onions and rabbit stock weaving into the hot air. Lydia joined him at the table of rough-hewn timbers, dust clinging to her sleeves. They ate in companionable silence, each bite a small celebration of what they'd reclaimed. Between mouthfuls, Ellis leaned back and gestured at the horizon. "You ever think you'd find more than just survival out here?" he asked, voice soft. Lydia studied the distant ridge before answering, her gaze tracing memory's contours. "I thought grief was all I had, me father's story, the evictions, the nights alone." She paused, stirring her stew as if measuring her own past. "But then you came." Her words were quiet, honest. "Taught me that land isn't just something to hold on to. It's something you build with someone else." Ellis reached across the table and took her hand. The calluses of his own matched her sproof of mornings spent under oak and pine, of fences rebuilt and barns reforged. Together, their voices blended with the whispers of wind through standing timber, a melody born of scars and new beginnings. In the afternoon heat, they tested the repaired well, lowering the bucket and hauling up clear water that shone like promise in the sun. Lydia splashed her face, letting the cool burst of liquid erase the sweat and dust. Ellis watched, heart steady as the well's steady rhythm. When she turned and caught his eye, the unspoken vow between them was complete. They would meet whatever storm next threatened these fields. As dusk bled red and gold across the sky, Ellis climbed the porch steps and tightened a loose board while Lydia loaded firewood beside the hearth. Their movements fell into a familiar dance, each anticipating the other's step. The barn behind them stood silent sentry, its beam stronger now, its shadow a quiet guardian over land and hearts alike. Night settled softly, and around the first crackle of flame they shared stories, his of iron rails and distant whistles, hers of solitary vigils under empty skies. Word by word, confession by confession, they built a shared history stronger than any ledger or deed. Outside, the prairie wind carried their voices across unfenced miles. Inside, two souls forged in dust stood ready to claim whatever came next, together. A pale dawn light filtered through the cabin window as Ellis rose to the steady creak of floorboards beneath his boots. The air was cool, scented with pine smoke and the faint promise of rain. He stepped outside to find Lydia already at the well, hands wrapped around the crank as it turned with a smoothness born of their joint labor. Water rippled in the bucket, catching the sun's first glow and scattering it across the corral rails like warm amber. She glanced up, and her eyes met his with a quiet smile that spoke of nights spent side by side tending wounds and fences, of shared burdens lightened by trust. Breakfast was bread he'd baked last night, and goat cheese melted over an iron griddle. They ate on the porch, spooning porridge into tin cups, savoring the simple ritual. Lydia broke the silence, voice low as wind through grass. "They've begun repairing the road into town. More settlers will come." Ellis nodded, feeling the thrill and ache of change. Their ranch, once forgotten, would now draw eyes hungry for promise. He reached for her hand, rough fingertips brushing ash on her knuckles. "We'll be ready," he said. Together. As the day stretched, they walked the property line fence unchanged, barns mended, graves marked and respected. Under the elder tree, fresh blossoms trembled in a breeze, fragile emblem of renewal. Lydia knelt to straighten a marker at her father's grave, smoothing soil with gentle care. Ellis stood back, hat in hand, letting the wind carry away old sorrows. He felt the land pulse beneath his boots, its scars softened by their toil. By midday, the horizon blazed with summer heat. They planted young cottonwoods along the creek's bank, each sapling a promise rooted in hope. Ellis dug, Lydia pressed the tree into place, and together they packed the earth. Sweat beaded on their brows, but smiles flickered between them each time a root found soil. They worked in wordless harmonious halves of the land's redemption. That evening, as twilight cooled the air, Ellis and Lydia sat on the porch swing, its chains newly oiled. He draped an arm around her shoulders while she leaned into his chest, their silhouettes outlined against the barn's sturdy frame. She traced the edge of the newest deed in her lap, ink still crisp. "We earned this," she said softly. He kissed the top of her head. "And we'll defend it no matter what comes." Above, the first stars emerged, winking to mark the end of one story and the start of another. The prairie exhaled a hushed lullaby, carrying the coyote's distant call. Ellis and Lydia exchanged a glance full of weary triumph. Their frontier, once marred by loss and violence, now stretched before them as home-hard won, blood-bought, and held fast by the promise of tomorrow. In the hush of that evening, they found peace not as a gift, but as a reward for every nail driven, every drop of blood spilled, and every step taken together across that endless, whispered prairie.